Hello, welcome to Political Perception. I'm your host Curtis, and today we are discussing the U.S. government shutdown of January 2018. So the shutdown is now over, but for 3 days the federal government sent home any non-essential personnel because the legislation that is intended to fund the government did not pass in time. You can see examples of areas that were shut down here. So the shutdown was finally ended on January 22nd after Democrats decided to end their filibuster of H.R. 195. This is an important detail because it is often said that Republicans have control of the Senate. But if Republicans have control of the Senate, why could they not get this bill passed before the deadline? We will answer that question and go over what led to the government shutdown now on Political Perception. There are 100 seats in the U.S. Senate, and Republicans currently occupy 51 of those seats, a simple majority. But is a simple majority what you need to completely control the Senate? Now, unlike the House, there exists in the Senate the filibuster. And what this is it's a tactic that is designed to delay voting. And it can be a long speech or it can be various obstructive processes. But in order to force a filibuster to end, you have to invoke closure. And closure requires 3/5 of the Senate to vote yay. So that normally means if you have all 100 senators sitting in, you need 60 votes. Republicans did not have 60 votes. You can see the roll call vote here from Senate.gov. I will reference this site, House.gov, and Congress.gov as being the primary sources for this information. It's not normally shown on mainstream media, but having these sources right in front of you helps demystify the legislative process. But let's move back to the actual vote. So, the Senate Republicans, led by Mitch McConnell, could not stop the Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer, despite the Republicans having a simple majority. That is because the Democrats were able to successfully filibuster. Even if you included the Democrats who voted yay, the Republicans did not have 60 votes, and therefore they could not force the filibuster to end. That means as long as there are 41 Democrats who will vote no on these closures, that means the filibusters can go on, and the Republicans cannot do anything to stop them. The idea of controlling the government is to entertain the idea that one party is completely able to overpower the other. The other party cannot do anything to stop them. You can see in this scenario that Republicans are not in control. So if anyone ever says that Republicans control the Senate, you have to tell them no, they don't, because they do not have the 60 seats necessary to completely control the Senate. But let's return to the government shutdown. To illustrate how we got into this scenario, let's talk about the legislative process. It is the responsibility of Congress to pass the federal budget. That means you need to balance the spending that the government does by the income that the government receives. You can see what this looks like in this infographic here, available from the Congressional Budget Office. Now, there's a smooth way for this budgeting process to work. Both the House and Senate have 12 committees that basically break up the federal government into these sections, sort of like the president's cabinet. You can have the defense, the education. These are all separate committees, and each committee will basically work together, come up with a bill, and then you have to pass that bill in both the Senate and the House, and it gets signed into law by the president. And that's basically your budget for the entire year. Now, this isn't too complicated, but it requires good cooperation. That's why it has not happened on time since 1997. So if you don't pass these full bills, then what you can do is do two other things. The first is what is called an omnibus bill. And what this allows you to do is it takes all the different committees, or at least a large percentage of them, and combines it all into one bill. Now, this is slightly less democratic because you're basically forced to veto or pass everything all at once. There's no line item veto for the president. So here's an example of that from 2009. You can see how there's some political strategy in this sort of omnibus bill because you're basically forcing the president to sign everything in the law or veto everything. Now there's a third way to pass funding or appropriations, and that's the continuing resolution, which is the mess we are in right now. So a continuing resolution is basically when Congress passes just a short-term bill that will last for a few weeks to maybe a few months instead of one that lasts for the whole year. Now, the bill that was successfully filibustered by the Democrats was H.R. 195. This bill was originally intended to finance the government into February. The extra time would essentially let lawmakers flesh out a full bill. Because they didn't, the government shuts down as a result of the Anti-Deficiency Act. This was put into place to ensure that Congress does its job of handling the nation's budget. But let's go back to H.R. 195 and look at the name of this bill. Federal Register Printing Savings Act of 2017. What does this have to do with the budget? Nothing. In order to pass these continuing resolutions, or CRs, they have to slip them inside of prior bills, such as H.R. 195. Here's a look at the bill before and after an amendment. This was originally a completely unrelated bill that was amended to slide in the CR essentially right into the middle of it. You can see the division here. So since a budget was not enacted before the start of the fiscal year on October 1st, 2017, this is what has been happening. We have to pass CRs. Now this is the fourth CR after the Continuing Appropriations Act of 2018. Let's look at the timeline of these CRs. We had H.R. 601, which was formed into the Continuing Appropriations Act of 2018, which would provide funding until December 8th. Then we had H.J. Res. 123, which became the Further Continuing Appropriations Act 2018, which continued funding until December 22nd. Then, out of H.R. 1370, we had the Further Additional Continuing Appropriations Act, which extended funding until January 20th, and now we have H.R. 195, which became the extension of Continuing Appropriations Act 2018. The blame game has gone around for this shutdown, and honestly, both parties are partly responsible. The Democrats basically used the threat of a government shutdown to force the Republicans' hand on immigration reform. That's not what a funding bill is for. These appropriation bills are supposed to fund the federal government for a full year. Do not try to use these bills for your own political games. So Democrats lose a point there. But Republicans lose a point simply because even though I've talked about how they don't have full control of the Senate, they still have the simple majority. And if you're the party that is in control, you should be doing what you need to get these bills passed on time. So both parties have some blame or responsibility for this. But let's go back to this bill from 1997. It is understood that these bills aren't easy. They require cooperation, they require amendments. It takes a while to get these through the committees, but that is what is supposed to be done. And every time Congress does not accomplish this task, you should be upset. We should have 12 committees, all with their own separate bills, signing the law by the president by October 1st. Every time that doesn't happen, you should be upset. Now, people just celebrated the end of this government shutdown. It ended on January 22nd. But let's look at the fine print of what was signed into law. This CR only lasts until February 8th, which is just around the corner. Now, does anyone think it's reasonable for us to have 2 government shutdowns in the span of 1 month? I don't think so. Everyone take note of how your Congress people are actually voting on these matters. Are they trying to get these budgets passed? Are they trying to use these appropriation bills basically for their own political means? If they aren't doing their job, you can vote them out, and that's what you should do. But I hope we can basically agree on the fact that 1, Republicans do not have true control of the Senate. They are not truly responsible for everything that happens. And 2, that Democrats and Republicans need to come together and get these bills passed on time. Thank you for watching.